This episode is sponsored by Free Market Kids. Join the league of families who are transforming family time into unforgettable Bitcoin learning experiences. With our Hodl Up Bitcoin mining board game, you're not just playing, you're building bridges, creating memories, and unlocking the brilliance of the future one block at a time.
He would read upside down. He would write upside down. It worked for him. And if I had insisted that he sit in a certain posture, it would have killed the love of reading very, very quickly.
Their view of the world is it's completely normal to have books. Mom and dad are reading, brothers and sisters are reading, The books are everywhere, they're very available, and nobody is freaking out when you touch them.
It's such a disservice that we have this age range for abilities and skills.
There's a whole parenting perspective on this. Maybe someone doesn't feel comfortable reading. Maybe English isn't their first language. Or
right, and so that's where the audiobooks come in. Hey everybody, welcome to Bitcoin Homeschoolers. On this episode, we wanted to try something a little bit different than what we've done before. We did receive some comments from some of our listeners that, well, it's really helpful for us to address a lot of the sort of parenting and teaching principles that it would be really helpful for the young parents who have kids that are just at that age where they might start to learn the ABCs and the 1, 2, 3s to have some practical hands-on advice from our own experiences. And so that's what we want to focus on in this episode. Specifically, I want to share experiences that we had when we were teaching our 4 kids how to read. And in addition, I want to share what I observed of what other homeschoolers have done, the successes or the failures. And hopefully that'll give you a pretty good overview. And we welcome any questions that you might have, and we'll incorporate those in our future episodes.
Right. So what we're doing, we're building essentially a library of not just us ranting about self-custody of education, but actual practical, useful things that parents could use or homeschoolers could use with their kids. So it just so everybody knows, in this session, Tali is far and away the subject matter expert. So my job is mostly to just maybe ask a couple of clarifying questions along the way. So I'm almost going to be interviewing my wife. It feels a little weird, but let's try this format out. So Tali, today's subject is choosing the right reading material, and specifically right in the sense of cultivating the right attitude. Is that the subject you want to get across today?
Yes, reading material. The attitude that you're referring, I would actually rephrase it as just cultivating the love of books in general, and then also to manage parental expectations. I think that's a really, really big part of this equation, because I think most people, when they think teaching their kids how to read, immediately they jump into what material should I use, what curriculum should I use, but nothing impacts this experience for your child more than your attitude.
Right. So this is for the beginning stages. This is we're focusing on the right reading attitude for very young children. That's our focus today.
Yeah, preschool, okay. It may be kindergarten, depends on where your child is right now in terms of interest, but beginner readers, how about that?
That sounds good.
Yeah.
All right. So the one question that, as you already mentioned, that we will often get in a discussion is, what would you recommend for the right reading material? So you went through a lot of different processes. Your due diligence in trying to find the right book and the number of books was quite extensive. Maybe we start with how you chose the material.
Right. So I think there are 2 major features that you should look for when you start reading to your kids. Actually 3, let's say 3. One is, if they're young, like they're 2, 3, 4 years old, it's really helpful that they get to touch stuff, that they get to handle things. I think, and I'm not just talking about tactile kind of feeling, with your fingertips, but there were some parents that I observed when our kids were really little who were very protective over books, and they require their kids to wash their hands before they touch the books. The books pages could not be bent. It had to be like pristine, and they're supposed to respect the books. And I think while that's a great quality to cultivate, of course, respecting your material possessions, it puts a wall between your child and the book if they have to be so careful with it. It goes along the same lines as allowing your child to get dirty outside. Some parents are very, very intentional in telling their kids to stay clean or to always be cleaning up because, there's germs in the dirt and stuff like that, to the point where children can't do what they're supposed to do. And so the first thing I want to say is when you're choosing reading material, if your child is very young, choose books that have texture. So there are some books that are like animal books where you flip to the page with a duck and there's like a little fuzzy piece that you can stroke with your hand. And if you flip it to a cow, then it's a little bit rougher piece. And if you flip it to a snake, then it's like a kind of a rubbery feel. So something that allows the child to interact physically with the book. So that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is depending on how young the child is. So if the child is 2 or 3 years old, it's important to give them books that they can handle and easily flip the page. So you've seen, if you go to a library or if you go to a bookstore, you will see these books are almost cardboard. And there's like, it's an inch thick, but they're only 5 pages because the pages are so thick. And I think that's really helpful for the younger kids. They don't have to struggle with flipping a page over. Their dexterity is not quite there. So you're just removing obstacles for them. If they're older, of course, then it matters less. Or when our kids were little, we thought it was really funny to give them giant books that they have to lug around, like the book is bigger than the child. I think for novelty's sake and for just the fun of it, that's great. However, if you're looking at really exposing them to reading material, having them read book after book after book, it's important that the book is the size that is convenient and easy for them to handle, and then the thickness of the pages as well.
Would you put in the same category the books that have, I remember the dinosaur book that had the eyeballs on it.
The googly eyes.
The googly eyes, and the kids could shake the book around and the eyes would move around, and it was, I don't know, it was a little gimmicky, but the kids like it.
Yeah, I mean, anything that helps them interact with the book. Because if we really look at what reading is, we're translating symbols. The lines and the squiggles in and of themselves have no meaning until we assign a meaning to them. And so we're really teaching our kids a foreign language when you're teaching them how to read. And anything that engages their interest, I think, will be helpful.
Okay, so part of this is just parents have the right mentality that this book is going to get bent, it's going to get spilled on, it's going to get thrown around, it's going to be on the floor and getting dirty. So, first of all, for you to be okay with that.
To be okay with that, yeah.
Second, and you want to set up that. Then you also wanted to get into, did you also want to get into different styles of books?
I do, but let me back up a little bit. So in terms of allowing your child to interact with a book, some books, if you buy them at full price, they're very expensive, and so of course we want to keep them nice. But if you go to library sales or flea market or any other place where you can get used books, then maybe if that's what you need to do in order to allow your kid to just do whatever they want with it, short of throwing it around because they hate it or something. But what we used to do was I would go to library sales, and at the time, this is 20 years ago, you can get a book for 10 cents. If it's a children's book, it was 10 cents. So I would bring home bags and bags and bags of books, and I had books in the bathroom. So it was, when they're sitting in the bath and splashing around, I was reading books to them, and it was okay if the books got wet because I got them for 10 cents. I just go to the next library sale and I get more. If they went to the bathroom and they're sitting there in potty training, we weren't worried that it was going to get dirty. It was just, of course, go grab a book and go sit on your potty, and just wait for nature to take course. The other thing was also we allow our kids to to interact with the books with pen and marker. I don't know if you remember that, Scott, but if they would draw things into the book. They would highlight words. They were circle words. They would.
I don't remember much of that, but
Yeah,
okay.
they
Yeah.
did, and you know, if they love a book, it went everywhere with them. It might have gone to bed with them. It would go into the car. It would go into the bathroom. It would go into the tub, and it went everywhere. And it was just this, just take away all the obstacles between them and the book. And that would be my number one recommendation.
So another place for books are church rummage sales /
Yes.
garage sales.
Yes.
From what I recall, there are also used bookstores that are specifically geared towards homeschoolers. So you could take your whole curriculum there.
Yeah, you can
and
find those places.
Hand-me-downs. You could go to other homeschooling families or either other families where their kids have gotten older and they no longer are using the books for the age that you're talking about. So there's a lot of ways of getting basically a large number of books. So I'll interject my observation on this, and my observation was that the kids just got used to seeing books. There were piles of books in every room. There were books in the car. There were books in the bedroom. There was books for pretty much, there were just books everywhere. And it was, they could then go through it and pick out the one that was of interest to them, because the boys might want the truck book, the girls might want the rabbit book, or whatever other subjects. They all, some subjects, like the dinosaurs, seem to be good with everybody.
There's some books that are like also 3D, you know, like you open it and it's like a pop-up book.
Yeah, those rip. I find that those
rip really easily.
Rip really easily.
But it was also, again, they're very, very expensive if you buy them new. But if you find them at garage sales and places, then you can allow your kids to be a little bit more relaxed. We have books in the car. We have
everywhere.
So when, like, for example, when we went to the doctor's office, and you know, only one child had an appointment, the other three I would literally haul in a wagon full of books for the other three that were waiting in the doctor's office, and people were always so impressed because, oh my God, you're getting your kids to read. But it was such a normal part of their life. It was just
well, and they had choices. So if you're bored and you give them a pile of things in front of them, they might look through it. You could also mix in, I know it's not part of today's conversation, but you can always mix in coloring books and other types of...
Thank you for bringing that up, because one of the things that was really, really super helpful when the kids were very young, we're talking like 2 years old or something, were those sticker books, because that didn't require any translation of symbols. They just got to interact with pages and get used to the format of books. And you just... I'm sure you can find them now still. Like the back half of the book has all the stickers together, and then the front part of the book would have places where you would put the sticker on. So that was a very easy, not necessarily reading per se, but just interacting with the books. That was a really great one. And also those books where you draw a line from one end of the page to the other, almost like a treasure hunt kind of thing. And it just allowed them to practice holding a marker or a crayon in their hand and just trying to make a line, like deliberate lines.
Did you ever see the older kids teaching the younger kids how to read with the baby books? I just had this image of, I don't know if it's...
They didn't teach each other, but they read to each other.
They read to each other. Let's say it's okay, not teaching, but they were interacting. So the end result is, in the kid's mind, as the kids are building a view of the world, their view of the world is it's completely normal to have books. Mom and dad are reading, brothers and sisters are reading, the books are everywhere, they're very available, and nobody is freaking out when you touch them. It's very safe and encouraged.
Here's another kind of book that it just popped into my head. These were books that had the sound buttons on the side. So as you flip through the pages...
We're aging ourselves.
We're aging ourselves, but you would push a button and it would make a sound. again, it's just hand-eye coordination. It's looking for symbols and associating different sensory inputs with the reading exercise. So yeah.
All right. So we covered that.
Okay. So another thing I want to mention when I was looking for books, because I didn't just go to these library sales and just reach out my arm and sweep everything into my bag. I was really deliberate in how I chose books. So when my kids were young, I looked for books where the cartoon has simple lines, because I noticed that if the cartoon was very complicated, they weren't interested. The second thing is I looked for books with a very large font, because when you get to the smaller fonts, again, the kids are not interested. And those were the two major things that I looked for: simple lines and large font, because sometimes I would pick out books that I think, oh, that's a really cool book, and I would put it in the basket with the kids. And at night, of course, we did the bedtime reading, and they never chose the ones with the little words or the complicated, beautiful drawings. They wanted the simple, they wanted large words. And we can even, like, as you're reading to them, you can say, can you find the word dog? If the book is about dogs. And it's very easy for them to find it. Their eyesight isn't as good as it will eventually become. So it's very, very important, especially if you're teaching them sight words, that the words are big enough.
Okay, as a dad, the thing that I found, my observation is it's okay to be silly. It's okay that the material, you're not literally trying to teach them. So let's take Bitcoin books, for example. There are multiple Bitcoin baby books out there that fit the category that we're talking about. There's no way to get all the complexities about Bitcoin across in a kid's book. And so you could look at that on one hand and say, well, then what's the point? You just put the letter B in the book, and you're calling it a Bitcoin baby book. The point that I hear you making is you're trying to choose material less because of the specific thing you're teaching, and more to just make reading fun.
Yes.
Because the goal is that in the long term, the step after this is they are learning how to teach themselves. They are learning to love reading.
Right.
Yeah,
I wouldn't even say we're making reading fun. We're actually just we're associating positive feelings with books. There's no teaching of reading or reading at all yet in the beginning stages. You're just associating stories and books positively.
With positive feelings.
Yes.
Yes. I feel good with this. I laugh with this. Mom and Dad are sitting with me when I do this. They have funny pictures. Dad makes funny noises when he reads these things. But it's a positive association. You're basically associating books with a positive emotion. That's
the job.
Is
I
way
think.
more important
Yes.
than whether the word Satoshi or Bitcoin or something else. It's great that those are in there, and you can certainly talk about it. But at the age that we're talking about, if you have a 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, you're really focused more on this experiential association, your emotional association with reading. That's what your main point. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We talked about expectations, right? Or was there something that we missed on?
I do want to talk about expectations, but I want to go back and share one more thing that we did. I thought was, I kind of stumbled into it. I didn't even plan to do it, but it just worked out really well, which was I didn't start teaching our kids how to read with phonics, because that wasn't the way I learned, and I feel like it's very mechanical that way, and I wanted them to be exposed to the language, like the beauty of the language, so I didn't want to break it into small pieces. So I did not start teaching them phonics. Of course, I taught them the ABCs and the sounds. However, when they were reading, what I did was I would choose the books that had the simple lines and bold colors, large font, and then I chose the ones that had audio book reading. So when you go to the library, and I think they still do that today, I don't know how, if you do the Kindle version that speaks to you, that's a different experience. But back in the day, what we were able to find were these pouches, like book pouches from the library that had the book and the CD. And you would listen to a professional read the book, and of course their voice is very soothing and just very inviting. And then what you would hear ding, and then it was their sign to flip the page, and then the reader would read it, and then ding, and then they would flip the page. And that worked out really, really well. Sometimes it's not even a ding, it's just like the sound of a page turning, but it gave the kids the ability to enjoy the stories by themselves, because I have 4 and I couldn't possibly give everybody individual attention all the time. So I was able to set the kids down with 20 books, because each book would be, I don't know, just a few minutes, but they felt so autonomous. Is that independent reading? They weren't necessarily reading, but they felt like they were reading. And again, we're just creating associations. And if the words are big enough, eventually they will associate it because they know the ABCs and the sounds anyway.
Okay, let me go sideways a little on you in this one. So when I read the Dr. Seuss books to them, or at one point we got you talk about traditional fairy tales, you talk about Bill Bennett's Book of Virtues. There are other things.
Those
when
are
you're
for older kids, though.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, is there's nothing wrong with reading other stories. So, for example, if you have multiple kids at multiple ages, and you're going to want something possibly where all of them can listen to.
Okay, so that's a little bit further down the list that I will go over, which is there are 2 separate things, though. Like, one is you're exposing them to language art. So you want them to hear beautifully narrated English expressions in good literature or good writing in general. So they get sucked into the narrative of the story because it's well written and the different scenes are well described. Then the other hand, you're really associating, that's the teaching reading part, right? You're associating specific words to specific sounds. So it's almost like you're teaching them sight words.
Well,
but all the words are like that.
Well, where I was going with that is the kids are going to get through this stage really fast. And it's just a blink of an eye to where these books are appropriate. And one of the beautiful things to do is to also let them let them get sucked into a story, so they understand that they can go into another world when they're doing stories. And that's a positive association as well. And I just, to me, that line between these kids' books and the traditional fairy tales or the Bill Bennett Book of Virtues or just whatever else those next steps are, it's real. It happens so fast, and I don't see why you could also intermix. It's
well,
not.
Yeah,
I don't think you're saying you can't.
No,
do that.
I'm not saying that at all.
Okay.
I'm just saying if your purpose is to introduce them to books, allow them to interact. Pick the books with the big letters. Mm-hmm. We're talking young kids here, and then let them listen to the book read to them by professionals with some little bit of music in the background. I feel like there's still a lot more interaction from the part of the child than watching a cartoon or listening to an audio book on Kindle. Another thing, though, I want to say is when I was teaching the kids how to read, I gave them books that were way beyond what they should, quote unquote, be able to understand. And then what I did was, so I had the simple things, of course, to make it very, very easy. But for the ones that I challenged them on, I gave them each a ruler. And I found this ruler that was solid on the top and solid on the bottom, but the middle part was clear. And I think I found it at Barnes & Noble. I think it's for people who have eyesight issues. But what that allows the child to do is to focus one line at a time, because that focusing skill is not yet developed. And so if you show them 3 sentences on a page, some kids will have a lot of trouble following one sentence versus another. But if you give them a ruler, and it doesn't have to be the fancy one that I bought from Barnes & Noble, just give them a cardboard piece of paper that allows them to move from line to line so they can just focus on one line at a time. I found that to be really, really helpful for the kids when I challenged them to read chapter books. Now, they weren't reading the chapter books, they were listening to it being read to them, and they were following the story with your eyes with the ruler and the book on the page. And they were able to advance a lot further in their language comprehension that
No,
way.
that's a great point.
And one example I want to share is
Get them their own rulers.
So
even.
Brianna was, I think she was 4 or something, and she was listening to a dog story, and I wasn't sitting there listening with her. I was going in and out of the room because I was trying to take care of the other 3. And then later on that day, she came into the kitchen and she goes, "Mom, I am red with rage." And I was like, "Red with rage?" She had gotten mad at her brother for doing something, and she had just learned that expression from the book, "I am red with rage," and she was 4 years old. And that's the beauty of challenging them with some well-written literature in the original form. I didn't give her the dumbed-down version,
Yeah, I like the idea. You could even get it without spending a lot of money. Get each kid their preferred ruler, and you could even make your own.
They can make it.
You can make your own, and now it's a tool that you've made it easier. Therefore, you've lowered a barrier for them. You've made the association more positive. If a if a child is struggling, then that could be a frustrating experience. If they see their siblings being able to read fast and they can't do it, and you give them a tool, and they get to decorate their tool, or they get to pick out the theme of the tool. So I think that's an important thing that most people don't think about. I didn't think about it until you mentioned it. The other things I'm thinking, I don't know if you want to get to these today either, but in terms of establishing a positive association with reading, the comment we just had a moment ago, where you're teaching them that stories can grab you. You can get pulled in a story, so maybe they can't read it, but somebody is reading it to them, the parent, or maybe it's a audible version like you were just describing. But I also think you could also do some things like you could have family reading time. So instead of gathering everybody around the TV, you could have family reading time. And I say that because the kids are also watching how adults react. So if you use the words and you tell your child that reading is really, really important, and you give them a book, and then you go to your phone, or you go to your TV, or you go to your laptop, or whatever it is, versus you also picking up a book, and they see mom and dad reading, they are now they're associating other things that they're with reading, even if they're not reading that particular book. You could be reading whatever you want. Go read one of your dry economic books or something and have at it. But if they just see that, oh, I want to be like mom. Mom's reading. What is she reading? It could be anything from a cookbook. It could be literally anything to you. So the next lesson you're going to teach them. But I do think there are actually layers of things where they're picking up, and it's not just the book itself. It's all these other things.
It is. And then to get back to your point about them getting emotionally sucked into a story, we talked about this actually with Guy Swan on the other podcast, that stories are such a natural part of the human tradition, and kids can relate to stories so much more quickly than facts and figures that we share with them. So another example I want to share is when our kids were young and they were listening to the classics, the Lassie and it was originally called Lad, and other books like Where the Red Fern Grows and things like that. I just remember going into a room where the kids had been reading, and they're in tears because they felt such sympathy toward a dog that had to be put down or something like that, And it's just like that. That's such a beautiful experience. And even beyond the fact that they got emotionally involved is because they heard words and formed pictures in their own mind. It wasn't made for them. It wasn't like watching a cartoon where the creative work has been done. They exercised their creative mind. They associated the story with this storyline, and whatever movie was playing in their mind, they were emotionally sucked into it. And that is such a great skill.
Well, that's what I meant by learning that books have story. That's what I was referring to, is that they realize that this thing that looks like just a bunch of papers that are glued together actually contain these journeys. You could go to space, you could go to the center of the earth, you could be walking with the dinosaurs, you could do anything in a book. And yeah, you can also feel sad if Bambi or some other character in the story has something happen to them. But for them to understand that they can get feelings from a story, and that's the power of the story is the power, but it's in the words, and to make that association is a really big deal.
It is, and also the fact that they can use their imagination. I feel like today, because audio-visual is so advanced, especially video, our need to imagine stuff is greatly reduced compared to a long time ago. Like a long time ago,
we're not exercising
we're not using our imaginations very much because we don't need to. And so instead of giving them, a rag doll where they have to imagine it's a princess or something, we now give them a beautifully created, almost duplicate of a real life baby doll. Or, if you go into even the Barbie land where you have the hair and the eyes and everything like human-like, they don't need to imagine anything. It's already been done for them. And then suddenly they grow up and go to school and the teacher's like, be creative. How are you supposed to do that?
Yeah, it's atrophy. You need to exercise that muscle, if you will, the imagination, the creativity. Okay, so do you want to talk about the environment that you set up? I feel like we've already touched on this. It was on the list, though.
So the environment basically is let it happen anywhere. Again, I go back to what I observed when our kids were young and some of their friends. Some people are quite rigid in when they believe reading should take place, how it should take place, where it should take place, and it just creates a lot of unnecessary structure. So, do they need to be sitting up when they're reading? Ideally, sure, but if they want to read upside down, should we say
comment on that, because that's the way Nolan used to be.
He would read upside down. He would write upside down. It worked for him. That was the way his brain worked. And if I had insisted that he sit with both feet on the floor, elbows on the table in a certain posture, it would have killed the love of reading very, very quickly. But they were reading anywhere and everywhere, in good lights, in bad light, in sit up or laying down, or just unless you're really convicted that it's hurting their health in some way or safety, let them read and interact with the reading material in the way that suits them and that they prefer.
Okay, so I know you want to share certain books that you want to recommend, but you want to first get to do you first want to get to overcoming challenges?
Well, so I feel like that word challenge is sort of a loaded word because it implies that for whatever reason your child's progress didn't meet your expectations. And I just want to say that honestly, I feel like it's such a disservice that we have this age range for abilities and skills that we've all been sold is appropriate. So that the fact that your child should start learning the ABCs in preschool and be able to recite words in kindergarten, et cetera, from what I observed and have heard from other homeschooling parents, the truth is that, yes, it's really great if we can say to people, oh, my kid is reading chapter books at 3, but the only person that pleases is yourself. It's an ego thing. Because if they read well at 3, or if they don't read well until they're 9, in the end, they can read, and that is the point. And so, for example, our niece, she didn't start to read well until she was 7. And at the time, I was kind of judgy about that because I was like, oh, well, my kids learn how to read earlier than that. What's going on? But she progressed so quickly when she finally, when all the pieces fell into place, She progressed so quickly, she ended up writing a book and becoming an author herself. She's extremely talented in the language arts. And did it really matter that she didn't read well until she was 7 or 8 versus 3 or 4? It just doesn't matter. So that word challenge, the only thing you need to address is, does your child like books or does your child hate books? That's the only thing you should care about right now, I think.
I'm looking at it from, I'm trying to recall what we experienced. My challenge was working my fiat job. I would come home when I was tired, and it was really easy to say, not now, or do it later. And I found that I don't know the number of times that I would fall asleep reading to the kids, or they were reading the book. And I have this memory. I was sitting down on the floor somewhere, and I remember being kind of groggy, and I hear your voice saying, "Did Daddy fall asleep?" or something like that. And Brianna had walked away from me, left me there with whatever kid's book that I was. So just imagine an adult, there's Dad laying down with a kid's book because he fell asleep, and the kid's like, "Well, Dad's out, and I'm going to go walk around and check on Mom," or whatever she was going to do.
Yeah.
And it's funny to tell a story, but I don't know. That's not exactly the creating a positive thing for this, for the kid to say, "Oh, this is not important enough that my dad will fall asleep." I guess what I'm saying is I was struggling with the energy at the end of the day to do what I wanted to do, and the temptation to not do it at all, or to go to bed, or to get sidetracked into whatever was going on. My challenge was all the high time preference fiat stress of whatever that is. And I don't have a great solution for that. I think you need to be aware of it, and you need to commit that if this is a priority, you're going to find a way to do it in whatever way you can. But my challenge was just different than the other things that you're talking about. You're taking it from the kid's point of view. They're struggling with something, or they don't like it, or something like that. I'm saying there's a whole parenting perspective on this, and there are other things. Maybe someone doesn't feel comfortable reading. Maybe English isn't their first language, or
right. And so that's where the audiobooks come in. Your kids really just want to cuddle with you anyway. So if the voice is not coming from your mouth, but is coming from the CD, I was going to say cassette player. Oh my gosh. The CD player.
We did have those.
Yes.
So we did have those.
They don't care, you know? So if you're working a full-time job and your time is really tight, do you have to wait until bedtime to read to them? No, you can read to them at dinner time. You also, I just want to say, as a backup, or maybe not even a backup, like a supplemental, what we did was we would play shows for them and always turn on the subtitles. The subtitles were always on. And so they're hearing the words, they're watching the video, and their subconscious mind is still taking in the words. And I felt that also added to it.
You just inundated them. They were, no matter where they were.
Yeah, wherever they were.
They were getting there.
And I wanted to make sure that the subtitles were large, because today you can make the subtitles different sizes. So make it large, because like I mentioned before, kids' vision, like their ability to focus into small font is not quite there yet. Yeah. And so it's really important that the words are big.
Right. But getting back to, so this part of our conversation is on challenges. So we have challenges for the kids, we have challenges with the environment, and we have challenges with, potentially, with the parents and what the parents are doing or not doing. I guess the selection of materials and things, that could be a challenge for some. If they don't have access to it, what do they do?
Well, okay, so let's say you don't have access to a library sale, and you do have to take care of the books very carefully because you check them out from the library. That's all fine, good. Like, none of this is absolute. Everything layers on top of each other. If nothing else, play stories, like read stories, in the background when you're driving around. Don't give them a iPad so they can look at movies, because the languages used for cartoons these days are very, very short and very
Dumbed
simplified, very dumbed down, very watered down. They're not going to be exposed to phrases like "I am red with rage." You know what I'm saying? You want them to understand and be exposed to the beautiful expressions of English. Like I think Shakespeare, like of course we're not going to play Shakespeare for the kids in the back of the car, but people at that time had multiple levels higher vocabulary
Oh, I saw this thing.
amount than we do today.
Yeah, I saw this thing. It was a test from, I'm assuming back when they literally had a schoolroom that was the whole school, and it was a test. And you would think that we would be advancing with our education and advancing with the levels, with all the tools that we have and the resources we have to do it. Most adults could not have passed this test. It looked like it was I forget the age on it. It had the age up on the top, and it was just like an antique. Someone had taken a picture of one of these things that's been framed now or whatever, and we really are dumbing down the language. It also reminds me of the John Taylor Gatto title, "Dumbing Us Down."
Right. And then so we were talking to the girls a little while ago, and they were actually upset at me for not being precise in my word choice when I was describing my feelings. And I think they were quoting from Michael Knowles' book called Speechless. And they were saying, if you're upset and the only word you know for upset is upset or angry or mad, that those are not super descriptive words. But if you're saying more, like if get more nuance, so are you irritated? Are you annoyed? Are you irate?
Be more specific with your thoughts.
Right.
It's also that reminds me of 1984, where they intentionally were double simplifying the language. So there are so many examples of I don't know, so many. There are consistently in different forms this theme that comes up with things with people in the Bitcoin space, where you're very aware of what a centralized government will do, a government that wants to control. And dumbing down the language is one of the things that you want to do. You have less words. You have less of ability to articulate what you're feeling to others. People have less of ability to understand, even if you could articulate that. And for those, and again, this episode is meant for what you're doing with the younger kids, but you're setting the foundation for the future for them, and the importance of. It's hard to, I don't know, if I was talking to someone and we started off with this topic, they'd think we were crazy to talk about the nuances of words and letting the kids hear these audible readings of much longer pieces to hear more advanced language and with different voices, male and female, and accents and whatnot. But it really fits with, if you want to set your child up for success in the future, first of all, teaching them, letting them enjoy books and what they can learn from books, teaching themselves all those positive associations. But it's also, there are so many layers of things you build on top of it, like what we were just talking about with learning language and having the ability to articulate things better and understand things better. Those are all things that we as Bitcoiners value. Right. And we want the kids to understand. And you got to get that baseline first, where if they don't enjoy the feel, they don't have a positive association with reading, it's that much more challenging.
It's an uphill battle later on.
Right.
And especially with schools these days, immediately testing comprehension. I think that if you're going to kill the love of something really fast, test them right away. So
heaven forbid you label them too.
Yeah, but
if you label the kids,
so I just want to say also, like, I remember specifically when our kids were young, we were listening to a book called Around the World in 80 Days. I think most people know this book. We didn't find the simplified version. We didn't find the grade level appropriate version. We found the original literature read by an English guy. And I didn't think that kids would, number one, be able to understand what was going on, and number two, be interested. But they were so into it. And they then started talking in British accent, which I think is hilarious. But anyway,
Especially if you're in Kentucky.
the point is when they listen to a wide variety of ways to express feelings, ways to describe a setting or an experience, all of those words are stored in the back of their mind. And if we're wanting them to have a large vocabulary to work with when they get older, they really need many, many inputs, because a lot of the words the definitions are very clear in the context of a story or a situation, versus they get into high school and now they're prepping for standardized tests if you want to send them to college, and now they're having to memorize vocabulary with definitions, which are, that's a sure way to make sure they never use that word again, because they don't really understand.
Yeah, the more you're exposed to it. I actually thought about this when someone was talking about language models with artificial intelligence, where you need a lot of information.
A lot of data.
And then you basically correct these vectorized weights that you can then put into a much smaller file and use and answer all kinds of things. And I think about, we really don't know how the human brain works, but if you think about the more they are exposed to different vocabulary, different descriptions, different stories over and over and over again, those little brains they can learn so much. And you don't have to memorize things
you
at
don't
that
have
point.
To memorize
It's like a language model, except it's just a kid taking in the world through all these.
Yeah, and also it's really important to have them listen to stories that were written by authors who were passionate about their subject. That was one of the key takeaways from the Charlotte Mason method, which I will do a different episode on.
That's a separate discussion.
It's so important that emotion is involved in that situation. So, and
Back
also
to
just exposing them to a wide variety of topics versus just one particular. So a lot of biographies, if you just look up biographies that are well written and read by a really good narrator, you will get the knowledge implicitly through the story versus saying, hey, let's go get a textbook on volcanoes versus a guy who goes, what is that? What is that story? The Journey to the Center of the Earth. Okay, so like if you read that, you're like, oh, that's interesting. Maybe we'll look up volcanoes, because it invoked feelings. It was a really well written story, and it was really interesting. And now when they go look at volcanoes, they'll have some kind of framework, to draw their interest.
Well, I recommend the purpose of today was to get your young child in the right framework, the right mental framework in terms of reading. And I know that you had some thoughts and things you wanted to share. I recommend let's.
Yeah, we can talk about this.
We're going to keep on going, and maybe we continue those other things. But let's get to the stuff you wanted to share today.
Well, I'll make a few recommendations based on what our kids' favorite books were. But again, there are millions of choices out there. Obviously, Curious George. I love Curious George, whether it's a cartoon version or the original art. Can
I comment real quick? I have to interrupt you. While I see you with this pile of books.
Yeah.
I just saw an image last day or two, somewhere on the news, and it talked about a public school where, because of some ideology, they decided that they were going to scrub the shelves. And it showed the library with massive amounts of empty space in it, because they were systematically removing things because they didn't want the kids to whatever, I don't know. It just struck me as completely opposite of what we're talking about today, where if you are destroying books and you're taking them away from people and you're banning books and you're doing things like that because they have conservative values, or it was a story that was written at a time when language was different, or race relations were different, or something else was different, and you just sweep it all off, they are hurting children tremendously, as opposed to letting them read and learn and discuss. And so as I see you with this pile of books, I have in this image the opposite of what's going on in places where someone might have an agenda and intentionally take away classics.
So
sorry for interrupting.
I remember when when the system, I don't know who the system was, when the system decided to scrub Dr. Doolittle's original books, because in the original books, he had conversations with a local indigenous black man wherever he was visiting with the animals, and somebody decided that that was racist, and they changed the storyline. And I think that that is a great loss, because that's a window into the way those people felt and believed
Different
back
culture,
then.
different
Now,
time. Yeah.
we disagree with that, but it doesn't mean that it didn't happen. And to scrub it so that our kids don't even have a choice to discuss it, right or wrong, I think
it's
that's just really short-sighted. And so there was a huge movement as a result with the homeschoolers, where they were somebody who was going to the Library of Congress and scanning in all the original classics in the original form and trying to preserve it.
Yes.
Because the classics were being scrubbed and changed.
Yes. And that's another reason to have a home library too. And
Yeah.
not just the ones that can get damaged like we're talking about, but go out and start collecting classics
in the original form. Because I love old books, old books. So most people, when they go to the library sales, they don't want old books because that's like yellow and smelly. But I love them. But yeah, so yeah, that's something.
So
that's something
I completely
altogether.
sidetracked,
Yeah.
but I saw your pile of books there, and then I remember this contrast, and everything we're discussing today is so aligned with the idea of a sovereign individual, anti-fragility, learning to learn, all these things that we've talked about over and over again, building this base layer of getting your child started on reading early and loving reading and giving them a lot of choices. Oh man, if you want to fight what's going on and you want to help your kids be successful, then pile up on these books. All right, so let's get to your pile.
All right. I just have a small example. Curious George. I really love the premise of the story. The ones that came out in the 1950s and 60s. They were drawings that I think they were pencil drawings. So the lines are a little bit more squiggly. The newer version have cleaner lines, and I have found that our kids, when they were growing up, liked the cleaner lines. They would reach for the cleaner lines, but still the story is so wonderful. Curious George. Fun monkey with his friend, man with a yellow hat. So that's a really great one. Also, any books that has rhyming in it, the kids just really love that. And so 5 Little Monkeys Jumping on the Bed, that's a great one. We love the Mercer books with I guess he's a gerbil and the crocodile. What is the name of this? Yeah, it's called Mercer Mayer books. We also really love Henry and Mudge, which is a boy with his very big Mastiff dog. I love Mr. Putter and Taffy, which is an old man and his cat.
What about
that dinosaur book?
I like the dinosaur book. Is great. I don't remember the name. I'll find it and put it in the show notes. But the Dr. Seuss books, I always thought were
Seuss books,
Green Eggs and Ham and others like that are just
and then
cat in
also the dinosaur one, what is it called?
They had great illustrations, and that was before AI, so they were actually painted by somebody.
But the kids love the rhyming part, and then also Will's Waldo, which is really weird, but the kids love looking for mysteries. So that was like when the kids were young enough that they weren't even speaking very well, and we were reading the books to them, we would get them involved by saying, "Where's the monkey?" And then they would look for the monkey, and we just look for different things that they can find on the page. It had nothing to do with what we were reading. It had nothing to do with the words. It was just like, "Can you find the monkey? Where's the hat? Can you find the butterfly?" And just get them involved, get them interacting. I think allowing them to interact is more important at this stage than anything else. Don't make them a passive recipient of teaching.
And don't lecture while you...
Yeah, don't lecture. Don't be like, "What is this word?" Definitely don't quiz. Do not quiz the child.
No, I'm just imagining. I think it's cool that in the Bitcoin space, everybody does their own thing. If you're a podcaster, you make a Bitcoin podcast. If you're a movie maker, you make a Bitcoin movie. If you're an artist, you make Bitcoin art. There are people doing little kids' books for Bitcoin. But if you turn it into a lecture, then that's not a positive
or a test.
Or a test. It's not going to be a positive feeling for the child, even if you think you're helping them with that material.
Yeah. So one of the things, okay, so if for those people out there who are very ambitious about teaching their baby how to read, look up this series under the Institute of Human Potential. And it's how to teach your baby to read, how to teach your baby math, how to teach your baby encyclopedic knowledge, how to teach your baby to be physically superb. Those are the 4 books under that Institute for Human Potential work. But in all of them, because I read all of them, of course, in all of them, they emphasize over and over again, do not quiz your child. Do not test them. And you can ask questions in a way that's testing, and you can ask questions in a way that is inviting input. And it's a nuanced approach. Like, for example, if you hold up a word and you say, what does this say? That is obviously a test. If you hold up 2 words and you say, which one says dog? And they point to the cat, you say, that's right, this one is the dog. And you hold out the dog card. So you never make the child feel like she or he has said it wrong. It's always positive. And that's number 1. And if you have any interest in musical instruments or whatever, I think most musicians will be familiar with the Suzuki method. The Suzuki method was created by a Japanese guy who wrote a book called Learning with Love. And he said the way that he taught 3-year-olds to play the violin in a way that blew the entire world's mind was positive reinforcement. He said on the first day, the child only has to hold the violin and stand in front of the parent, and they just clap and say, good job. That's it. The child's just holding the violin. Nothing else is happening. Just holding the violin. And they slowly build from there. And so we just want to remind you again that this is not a test. It is absolutely not a race. The love of learning and the love of books is priority number 1 at this point. And that's all you have to focus on.
Okay. Do you have other things that
I just have a bunch of like Mercer
we have
books,
hundreds of books, so you can't list everything. We have
thousands of books.
You can't list them all.
But just, the general framework of it's got to be easy for them to hold. It's got to have big enough words so they can actually read it. It's got to have the bold colors and simple lines, but also just take your child to the library and let your child pick out the books. And you'll see very quickly what kind of books they are interested in. And then if you have the chance to go to a used book sale, then pick out the books that your child will tend to pick out. Or even bring your child there and let them put the book into the basket.
Or do what you did, just bring home dozens of books at a time, and just the kids let them walk by, and the kids are curious anyway. If they see a pile there, and this one has planes in it, and the boy wants to look at planes, and the girl wants to look at the one with the puppy dogs, or whatever it is, it's the positive association that you're trying to create, not specifically teaching them that subject. It's a different thing
altogether. And I think that's enough for a young parent to think about now.
That's quite a bit.
Yeah.
Again, everyone, if what we're trying to do is we do want to listen, we do want to have interesting stories with people who are doing things with regard to educating their kids and taking self-custody of the education. But we are also trying to build up practical things that young families, so those that haven't had kids, you already have young kids, that we can help you get started. Once you start to get going, you're gonna realize that you got this and you're okay. Still fun to talk about with other parents, but the goal is we want to make this more than just us lecturing and saying the same thing over and over again about how great homeschooling is and how bad centralized education is. Like, we want it to be more than that. So we're going to continue to bring stories with interviews, but we're also going to do more things like this today, where we pick a subject related to education and just kind of rip on that subject to help you with some ideas. Whether you take our recommendations for the books or not, at least we've planted some ideas. Maybe it's getting a ruler, maybe it's just getting some used books, maybe it's the auto, just whatever it is. Hopefully there's at least one thing in here that you can take away and think about how you can apply or will apply in the future. And that's our goal, to make this as useful for others as possible.
Yeah, again, your child is in the driver's seat here. Let your child be the one picking them out. And even greater than the benefit of them learning how to read is the interaction they have with you, because there's nothing more that the child wants than to have interaction time with the parent. So
Wonderful. All right. Thanks, Tali. Thanks for sharing your tips on this subject. And we'll talk to everybody on the next episode. Thanks.
if you enjoyed this podcast and if you found this valuable, please leave a review to help others find us too.
For those who prefer zapping sats, we love those too. We're on Fountain, we're on Noster, and we're on Orange Pill app.
Also, I host a women's only Bitcoin podcast called Orange Hatter. And the mission of that podcast is to reach pre-coiner women. So if you know of someone in your life that you would like to introduce Bitcoin to, check it out.
So Tali and I also don't have sponsors for this show. We are trying to build and run Free Market Kids. You can check out our products at freemarketkids.com. This includes the Bitcoin mining game HODL Up, which is a great introduction to Bitcoin.
The school edition of HODL Up is always available. We also have the 2024 halving edition. It's going to be super deluxe. Very excited to roll it out. It is available on pre-sale at a 21% discount.
Until next time, happy hodling.